At 3:11 on a Thursday morning in late April, the first image was a motel bathtub in room 12 of the Red Pine Motor Lodge outside Dayton, the kind of tub with chipped enamel around the drain and a rust line that never quite scrubbed out, where two children were folded into themselves beneath a damp beach towel while rainwater pushed through a split seam in the ceiling and ran down the tile in thin gray threads. She is 7, or near enough that the difference does not matter tonight. Her knees are pulled to her chest, her hair pinned to her temple with plaster grit. One small hand pressed over her brother's ears each time the tornado siren rose, each time roof staples screamed and then settled, and then screamed again. The room had begun the night with stale air conditioning and the sour smell of old carpet cleaner, but by the time the warning siren made its third pass over County Road 8, the whole place smelled like wet drywall, detergent, and panic held quiet on purpose. The mother had dragged both children from the bed when the first window shook in its frame, then into the bathroom when the second warning came through her phone in a fractured burst of text before the signal cut out, and now she knelt on the cracked vinyl floor in motel slippers, shoulders against the vanity, one hand on each child when she could reach them. She did not pray out loud. She counted. Siren length, wind breaks, the gap between impacts, her own breath against the plastic shower curtain that kept sticking to her wrist. The girl was not crying. That was the detail the room held on to while everything else moved. She kept the one-eyed stuffed rabbit wrapped in a motel hand towel and tucked under her chin. Not as comfort, exactly, but as inventory, as proof that one thing from before still existed in her hands. Her brother made one sound when the north wall shuddered, a short swallowed noise, and she covered his ears tighter, then leaned her forehead against his hair and waited for the next metallic shriek. The mother said, "Stay low," once, then again when the lights blinked out and back on at half strength. After that, she stopped speaking. Words took up air she needed for listening. Outside, the truck stop corridor had already begun to tear in strips. A billboard half a mile east had gone down into the drainage ditch. A line of shopping carts from the gas mart had rolled into a chain-link fence and jammed there, rattling whenever the wind hit from the south. The ice machine by the Red Pine office buzzed on backup current with a brittle mosquito whine that carried down the breezeway between thunder cracks, and each buzz made the boy flinch because it sounded like one more thing failing overhead. In room 10, someone kicked a stuck door and shouted for a dog. In room 7, a television still played weather radar at full volume to nobody at all. In room 12, water found every angle. By 3:24, the rain came sideways hard enough to force itself under the bathroom threshold, and a thin sheet spread across the tile, carrying paint flakes and dust toward the silver drain. The children's socks darkened at the heels. The mother shifted, took off her own hoodie, and laid it under their knees without looking down, her eyes fixed on the doorway where the jamb had started to separate from the wall by the width of 2 stacked credit cards. The siren climbed again, higher this time, the pitch that made teeth ache. Somewhere in the corridor, glass broke, and then the corridor filled with a raw tearing sound, as if a giant hand had caught the roof edge and peeled. She still did not cry. She kept her brother's ears covered through the worst of it, even when plaster dust fell into her hair, even when the motel mirror cracked from corner to corner, and the light above it flickered in short white stutters. The boy buried his face against her shoulder and held the rabbit's towel edge in his fist, with 2 fingers only, like he had learned to hold on gently so he wouldn't take what wasn't his. The mother pressed her palm against the tub lip and leaned in over them, turning her back toward the door. Wind shoved against the building, then let go, then shoved again. The room held because it was too small to argue. By 4:02, the first violence in the sky had moved northeast, but the storm left a ragged tail over the county, hard rain and cold gusts that worried anything loose. First responders were still triaging blocked roads near the overpass, and the motel office line rang unanswered because the phone had gone dead in the first strike. 2 semis sat jackknifed by the fuel island down the road. Floodwater in the parking lot rose to the tops of cracked yellow curbs, carrying cigarette butts, insulation, and one child's pink sandal that nobody could place. Inside room 12, the mother waited for an all-clear she couldn't hear and would not trust anyway. Dawn came slow and colorless, that pale Ohio morning light that made everything look uncommitted, as if the day had not decided whether it belonged to repair crews or more weather. At 5:41, the cloud base lifted enough for people to come out and count what remained. Half the red pine roof was gone above rooms 8 through 14. A maple had split near the roots and dropped across 2 parked sedans. Shredded insulation drifted over the lot like gray grass, catching on mirrors and curb stops. The temporary triage tent behind a cinder-block church 2 miles north smelled of iodine, bleach, and wet canvas. Intake tables went up before coffee did. By 6:03, County Dispatch logged the first wave of external volunteers. By 6:17, a clerk from the gas mart on exit 44 had already told 3 customers that people are coming in from everywhere and meant it as warning. By 6:31, the deacon from Linden Avenue Baptist had finished a call about damaged pew windows and walked out to the church lot, with his collar still open and his face set in the old expression people wore when they expected trouble to arrive with noise. It arrived with noise. The sound came low at first, almost below hearing, more felt than heard through soaked ground and cinder-block foundations, a layered tremor that made stacked hymnals on a folding table quiver before anyone saw chrome. Then it climbed, deepened, multiplied, until the whole lot seemed to take the vibration into itself. Engines. Hundreds of engines. A deputy standing under the awning turned his head toward County Road 8 and narrowed his eyes against the rain mist, while another reached for his radio and then paused, listening for words from dispatch that did not come fast enough. They appeared out of thinning fog in staggered formation, headlights in disciplined lines, leather dark with spray, no revving for show and no wandering between lanes, just measured movement and distance held with practiced precision, 500 motorcycles strong by the eventual count. Though in the first seconds nobody counted, they judged. The gas mart clerk said, "This is going to get out of hand," and stepped back behind a pump barrier, as if concrete could decide intent. The deacon watched with his jaw tight and remembered every sermon line he had ever heard about wolves and flocks. 3 deputies looked from one rider to the next and saw tattoos, cut vests, hard shoulders, old scars, and the county's favorite shorthand for threat. None of them saw supplies yet. The line of bikes kept coming, road grime, saddlebags, patched denim beneath rain shells, helmet visors beaded with water, not a parade, not a drift-in crowd. A column with a plan that had been agreed upon before first light. At the church lot entrance, the lead riders did not cross the curb until a hand signal moved down the rank from front to rear, and when they did, they split cleanly into lanes with the economy of men who knew how to occupy a space without asking permission from people who had never offered it. One deputy muttered, "What are we looking at?" and nobody answered because the answer was still arriving over the hill in another wave of sound. On the far edge of the lot, near stacked pallets and a donation trailer with one broken taillight, a rider with a scar down his left cheek shut his engine off and sat still for one breath, before dismounting, spine stiff when his boots met wet asphalt. He did not look toward the deputies first. He looked toward the church basement door where intake line B fed into fluorescent light and paperwork. Rain ticked against cooling metal in 100 uneven rhythms. The county had expected chaos, or spectacle, or a fight it could narrate to itself later as proof of what it already believed. What it got instead had not shown its hands yet. What it got instead had not shown its hands yet. And that uncertainty sat over the church lot heavier than the wet air, because fear always moved faster than fact, and everyone in sight had already filled in the missing pieces with old stories about men in leather and engines loud enough to wake a county. Mike Fletcher stood beside his bike with rain running off the edge of his vest, one palm on the seat to steady the pull in his lower back, and watched the way people read them before a single word was spoken. Clerk behind concrete, deacon stiff at the shoulders, deputies angling their stance toward control. He had seen that look in mirror glass, in courtroom benches, in store windows after midnight. It was always the same look. You already are what they need you to be. At 6:34 that Thursday morning, another file of riders turned into the lot and cut engines in sequence, each shutdown popping in the damp like knuckles cracked in a quiet room, and the silence that followed was so sudden the backup generator behind the fellowship hall sounded as loud as farm machinery. Men stepped off bikes with the careful economy of bad knees, old fractures, torn shoulders, work boots softened by years, hands already moving to saddlebags and cargo nets. No one shouted. No one pointed. They waited for direction from 3 riders near the front who conferred without fuss, heads close, gestures clipped, then spread out toward the edges of the property as if they were measuring space no one else had thought to measure yet. The deputies watched for a provocation that did not come. The deacon waited for swagger and found logistics. The paradox announced itself there, plain as weather before anyone inside the church was ready to believe it. The men this county had practiced fearing were the only ones arriving in formation, with fuel, dry blankets, battery lanterns, and a plan built for strangers. It was not a sermon line and not a slogan. It was a fact on wet asphalt. Sometimes the people a town marked as trouble were the first to understand what protection required when paperwork drowned and phone trees failed. Mike took one step toward the basement entrance, stopped when his spine gave a small, audible pop, then kept going with the rolling gait of a man who had learned to carry pain without giving it a voice. The scar on his left cheek held rain in its shallow seam before it dropped to his jaw. Under the awning, Deputy Harlan shifted to block the door by habit rather than instruction, one hand near his radio, then looked past Mike and saw 2 riders unloading a folded pop-up canopy, 4 cases of bottled water, and a tote marked Med Supplies in black marker thick enough to read from 20 feet. Harlan cleared his throat. "You coordinating with county emergency?" he asked. Mike looked at him, then at the hallway beyond the door where fluorescent light buzzed over intake line B, and answered in a level tone. "We're not in your way." The deputy held the stare for another second, searching for disrespect, and finding none he could write down. "Keep your people outside until we sort capacity." Mike nodded once. "Copy that." By 6:41, the riders nearest the curb had begun directing civilian vehicles away from the mud-soft shoulder, where 2 minivans had already sunk to the wheel wells, doing it with open palms and short phrases. No one touching a car, no one forcing a route, just keeping traffic from turning the entrance into a bottleneck. The gas mart clerk, still under the station canopy across the road, called his manager and said there were hundreds of bikers at Linden Avenue Baptist, and he could not tell if it was good or bad yet. His manager said, stay inside, and locked the side door from behind the register. Across the lot, the deacon watched one rider kneel by an extension cord junction, lift it clear of a standing puddle, and set it on an overturned milk crate to keep the connection dry. He did not thank him. He did not tell him to stop. He turned and went inside to check on cots. From where Mike stood, he could smell 3 layers at once: diesel sheen drifting from County Road 8, bleach from the basement mop buckets, and soaked fiberglass insulation rotting sweet in the wind every time a gust came through the torn roofline of the motel 2 miles south. Sound came in bands: generator thrum, rain ticking on helmet shells, the slap of wet shoes on concrete stairs, the thin electric whine of the church kitchen refrigerator fighting unstable current. Under it all, the ringing in Mike's left ear from 27 years ago pitched just high enough that sirens still felt like nails. He did not rub the ear. He never did in public. Inside the church, volunteers had taped arrows to cinder block walls with blue painter's tape that would not hold in humidity. And each time a strip peeled loose, another person pressed it back with the flat of a hand, as if the shape of order could be maintained by reattaching labels. Intake line B curled around 2 folding tables and past a bulletin board whose cork had darkened with age around old staple holes. A paper sign read, "Family Units," and beneath it, someone had written in marker, "Please have ID ready." A second sign read, "No pets except service animals." A third had curled at one corner and now pointed at the floor, where muddy footprints overlapped until no direction was clear. At 6:46, a volunteer nurse named Carla Ingram, 56, night shift at Mercy for 19 years, carried a tray of paper cups past the basement door and paused when she saw the line of bikes through the rain. She had learned to triage by pattern recognition: breathing first, bleeding second, panic third, paperwork last. Outside, she recognized another pattern she had seen only during county floods and one warehouse fire in 2012, when informal networks moved faster than official ones and supplies appeared from places nobody had listed as assets. She watched Mike from the doorway, noted his posture, the way he scanned exits before faces, the way other riders waited for him without crowding him, and filed a judgment she would have denied making 30 seconds earlier. Not threat. Structure. In the hallway above the basement, a church volunteer with a clipboard tried to call roll numbers over the noise and kept losing her place because each family answered with 3 names and a story attached. Someone argued about medications left in a motel mini-fridge, now under open sky. Someone else asked where to charge a phone and whether chargers counted as personal property for lost item forms. At the end of the hall, a mop bucket overflowed where a roof leak found the seam in the tile and fell at regular intervals, each drop striking with a thin metallic tap that repeated like a metronome for a song nobody wanted. Mike stood under that sound for a full minute and watched the process stall at every corner where a rule required proof the storm had already erased. The rain eased for 9 minutes, then returned at a slant from the west, and with it came a colder wind that pushed through the lot, carrying the smell of snapped pine and wet asphalt scraped raw by debris. Riders set kickstands deeper into gravel and nudged front wheels to keep lines straight. One man with white in his beard and a stitched patch reading "Road Capped" checked his watch, then walked row by row counting fuel levels out loud to another rider writing numbers on a write in the rain pad. 42 full, 68 above half, 12 under quarter. They spoke like mechanics at shift change, because sentiment did not move supplies and daylight was already being spent. Mike moved along the awning edge and stopped near a stack of donated clothing sorted into banana boxes with masking tape labels. Kids 4 to 6, kids 7 to 10, women misc, men misc. The cardboard had gone soft at the bottom corners where water wicked upward. He lifted one box clear of a puddle and set it on a plastic pallet without comment. A woman from the school board, vice chair according to the lanyard still hanging around her neck, watched him do it and shifted her purse tighter under her arm. She had passed him once in municipal court years earlier and remembered only the vest and the case docket, not the charge outcome, not the man. Her eyes moved from the scar to the tattoos, to the bike, and back to his face, like she was assembling a warning sign from separate parts. Mike met her look for half a second and then looked past her to the stairwell where a boy coughed hard enough to fold at the waist. He walked toward the cough. By 6:58, the first county utility truck arrived with 2 linemen and a spool trailer, then parked because no one could reach the broken transformer behind the annex until the lot cleared. The linemen stayed in cab heat, drinking coffee from steel tumblers, watching the riders maintain lanes without being asked. One of them, older, said, "They're running this cleaner than dispatch." The other said nothing and kept his eyes on the entrance where families kept coming in with towels over their heads and plastic bags tied at the top to keep papers dry. The county had a plan in binders. The riders had one in muscle memory. Down the basement steps, the air grew denser, warmed by too many bodies and not enough circulation, carrying scents that told the night better than any statement. Baby powder, wet denim, menthol rub, bleach, coffee left on a burner too long, and the faint medicinal iodine from the triage table set up near the old choir robe closet. The cots stood in rows with painter's tape numbers at the foot, and between them ran narrow lanes where volunteers moved sideways to pass. A church clock above the supply room door had stopped at 4:13. Second hand fixed between marks, while every phone screen in the room insisted on a different minute, depending on signal strength. Time in the basement split into versions, and none of them offered rest. Mike paused at the bottom step and let his eyes adjust from gray daylight to fluorescent wash. He heard a child asking for a red cup instead of a blue one, because red was for home, and blue was for school. He heard a man in work coveralls trying to explain to intake that his wife was at Kettering and he needed to stay near a charger in case her call came through. He heard clipboard language flattening people into categories that fit forms better than lives. Dependent minor, non-custodial absent, documentation pending, reassignment possible. He heard every place the system had room and every place it did not. At 7:03, a draft moved through the cinder block corridor and lifted one corner of a damp flyer taped to the wall, revealing another older flyer beneath it, about a winter coat drive from 2 Januaries earlier. Mike stood in that corridor, rain drying in salt marks on his vest, and understood with the calm clarity that used to come to him in convoy movement overseas. This building was doing what it could, and what it could was not enough for the people who had nowhere else to stand. Behind him, beyond 2 doors and a parking lot full of idling silence, 500 riders waited without being invited inside. Ahead of him, intake line B bent around a janitor's supply alcove where a motel keycard lay on top of a folded towel beside a one-eyed stuffed rabbit, as if someone had set down the last map of where they belonged and was waiting to see whether anybody would read it. Mike read it. He did not move toward the alcove at once. He let one family pass in front of him, then another, then a volunteer carrying clipboards tied with red surveyor tape so they would not get lost in the crowd. And in those 10 slow seconds, the old part of him that measured rooms for trouble did what it had always done, mapping the cinder block hall by exits and corners, and who was watching whom, while the newer part, that had taken longer to build, kept its eyes on a motel keycard lying on a folded towel, like a receipt from a life that had already been closed out. 48 years of hard miles had left marks that people could read from across a parking lot, some true and some invented for him by strangers. The scar from left cheek to jaw hinge came from shrapnel thrown by a convoy blast in southern Iraq in 1991, when he was 23 and still believed loud men in clean uniforms could explain the world into order. The two blue-faded tattoos on his forearms had once been dark enough to start bar arguments all by themselves. His right knee clicked when he took stairs in damp weather. His spine popped when he stood from a low seat. The tinnitus in his left ear never shut off, a thin electric ring that rose to a needle when sirens climbed, so he had learned to read lips in half-light and to turn his right side toward people when they mattered. He had learned plenty of other things he wished he had not needed. The county wrote him down once as assault and disorderly after a bar fight that began with a shove and ended with glass in the wrong hand at the wrong moment. 9 months in lockup had taught him the speed of reduction. One report, one docket, one stale courtroom morning, and a full life got trimmed to a paragraph read by someone who had never met him. He came out quieter, more deliberate, with an apology he had no way to deliver to the man he had hurt, and no argument left with the way people looked at his vest in grocery store aisles. 11 years earlier, the divorce papers had come through on a Tuesday in October, with the weather still warm enough for open windows, and he had signed at the kitchen table while a fan pushed the smell of cut grass through the screen, then rode until dark because the apartment had too much silence in it. He had not seen his daughter since she was 10. He kept one school photo in the inside pocket of his wallet, behind an old fuel receipt, laminated from years of sweat and rain. None of that biography made him noble. It made him practiced. Outside this church, he and his chapter had spent years standing on the wrong side of open doors, tolerated when generators failed, useful when roads iced over, then politely asked to take the long way back out when cameras arrived. They knew how institutions worked because institutions had spent decades making clear where men like them belonged. Deliver the fuel. Leave the lot clean. Keep your distance from intake. Do not unsettle the donors. On disaster days, the rules softened just enough to use their logistics and hardened again by noon. Mike had stopped taking it personal around year 6, not because it did not sting, but because freight still needed moving and children still needed dry socks, whether he was welcomed or not. The chapter had become a kind of unofficial utility. They could build a perimeter, run traffic lanes, carry cots, clear brush, and stand still for hours if standing still was what kept panic from spreading. At 7:05 on that wet April morning, he watched the intake line bend around the supply alcove and saw that same pattern up close, the system doing what it had forms for and stepping over whatever did not fit. He noticed details without trying, the way old training refused to turn off. The mother in motel slippers had one heel strap torn and knotted with white thread. The boy's socks were dark to mid-calf and left crescent marks on the floor where he shifted weight. The girl held a rabbit missing one eye, the seam at one ear repaired with careful stitches in pink thread that did not match, done by someone patient at a table lamp. On the shelf above them sat a gallon of floor cleaner, 2 rolls of black trash bags, and a box of contractor sponges. The family had made themselves small between cleaning supplies because no one had assigned them a space that could hold all 3 together. A volunteer in a yellow vest looked toward the alcove, checked her clipboard, and looked away. She was not cruel. She was overrun. Behind her, a laminated chart listed cot capacities in dry erase marker. Men 24, women 28, family 11, overflow pending. Someone had added a note below in narrower handwriting. Boys over 6 may be reassigned if family section full. Mike read it once and felt his jaw set so hard the old scar pulled. The line kept moving around the alcove the way floodwater moved around fence posts. By his count, 62 adults had passed that corner since dawn, names checked on intake B, and no one had stopped for longer than a glance. A pastor from Linden Avenue, school board vice chair, an off-duty deputy still in station fleece, 2 insurance adjusters in branded windbreakers, the motel owner with damp paperwork in a plastic sleeve. Every one of them kept to the arrows on the floor. Carla Ingram came down the corridor again with a tray of paper cups and saw where Mike was looking. She shifted the tray to her left hand and stopped beside him, shoulder near shoulder, both of them facing the alcove without pointing at it. "You see them too," she said. "Been seeing them a couple minutes," he replied. Carla nodded once. She had hospital posture, even in church hallways, the efficient stillness of someone who had carried too many nights on too little sleep, and learned to save speech for what changed outcomes. "No family cot open yet," she said. "Paper says temporary split if intake keeps climbing." Mike kept his voice low. "Paper doesn't know that little boy." Carla looked at him then, directly, reading the weather in his face the way she read vitals at triage. "You got a plan?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. His gaze moved to the doorway, at the far end where rain flashed silver each time someone opened it, then back to the alcove where the mother had her palm flat on the floor, as if feeling for tremors no one else could feel anymore. "I've got people," he said. Carla set the tray on a radiator shelf and rubbed the bridge of her nose with 2 fingers. "If you do this, do it clean," she said. "No shouting match with intake. Not today." Mike gave one short nod. "Clean is all we do." He stepped forward then, and the floor's damp grit made a soft grind under his boot. He crossed the corridor slowly, giving the family time to see him coming, hands visible, shoulders lowered, no sudden movement. The same approach he used with skittish dogs at roadside wrecks and with veterans in panic spikes when sudden presence felt like threat. The mother lifted her chin first. Her eyes were bloodshot and unblinking, not from tears but from staying awake past the point where focus came easy. She pulled both children half an inch closer by instinct. Mike stopped a respectful distance away, enough room for refusal. Up close, he could see the motel logo on the keycard, Red Pine Motor Lodge in faded maroon, a scratch across the magnetic strip, where it had likely been dropped on asphalt and found again. He saw plaster dust caked in the hem of the girl's leggings. He saw the boy's knuckles white around the edge of the towel-wrapped rabbit. He smelled the cold rain lifting off their clothes as the basement heat reached them in waves. Sound narrowed to clothes things. The buzzing fluorescent fixture overhead, the drip into the mop bucket 20 feet away, the soft plastic crackle of the rabbit's motel towel when the girl tightened her grip. The mother spoke first. "We're waiting our turn," she said. It was not defiance. It was a warning not to offer what could be taken back. Mike crouched so his eyes were below hers and kept his hands resting on his knees where she could track them. "I know," he said. "Name's Mike Fletcher. I'm with the bike crew outside." Her gaze flicked once to his vest, then to the scar, then back to his eyes. "I didn't ask for security," she said. He shook his head. "I'm not here to move you." That sentence changed the air by a degree he could feel. The boy's shoulders dropped a fraction. The mother's fingers loosened from the towel edge. The girl did not look at his face. She looked at his hands, at the old knuckle scars. the worn callus along his index finger from years on a throttle, the crescent imprint where a ring used to sit. Children read hands faster than adults read words. Hers were small and chapped, thumbnails split near the quick, and she held that rabbit as if the one missing eye could still keep watch. From the intake table, a volunteer called for the next family and shuffled forms with the dry slap of paper sticking in humidity. Mike heard it, and heard underneath it the tiny intake language that made separation sound clerical instead of violent. Reassigned, temporary, capacity adjustment. He had seen versions of that language in barracks, in holding cells, in county offices where urgency got turned into filing categories. His instinct was already moving before his reasoning had assembled all the steps. He did not debate with himself. He recognized the moment and entered it. He shifted his weight and lowered one knee to the concrete, bringing himself level with the girl. "You got a name for him?" he asked, nodding to the rabbit. "Biscuit," she whispered. Her voice was flat from tiredness and careful in a way 7-year-olds should not have to be. The rabbit's single eye was a black button polished smooth by years of thumbs. "Good name," Mike said. The boy leaned against his sister's shoulder and studied Mike's boots, mud dried in layered ridges around the welt. The mother watched all three of them, still ready to pull away, still calculating risk, the way people did when promises had failed before. Mike did not crowd the silence. He let it stand until it settled. A gust hit the stairwell door and sent a chill through the corridor, carrying wet pine and diesel and the metallic scent of snapped power lines. Somewhere above, a chair scraped in the fellowship hall. Somewhere outside, one engine turned over and shut off again. Mike rose slowly, joints protesting, and looked toward intake B, where the family chart still waited for someone to mark a box that would not break this group into pieces. He looked back at the alcove. "Stay right here," he said. The mother's mouth tightened. "For how long?" Mike met her eyes. "Long enough for me to get this done." He turned toward the hallway, already reaching for the cracked flip phone in his vest pocket, moving with the hard certainty of a man who had finally found the exact task all his scars had been training him for. He made it 6 steps before intake line B stalled again, a knot of bodies tightening where the corridor narrowed beside the bulletin board, and he stopped because a woman in a green rain poncho had turned sideways to let a man with a cane pass, and behind them 3 more adults pressed forward with forms held high to keep them dry from the leak that kept finding the seam in the ceiling tile. The hallway smelled like wet paper and bleach. It sounded like people trying to stay polite while their lives came apart in specific administrative ways. At 7:07 on that Thursday morning, the volunteer at the table called, "Next family unit," and a man in a deacon's collar stepped up with 2 plastic grocery bags and a child asleep against his shoulder. Mike recognized him from the lot, collar open, jaw set. The deacon gave names, gave an address on Linden Avenue, gave his church title without meaning to, and was handed 2 wristbands and a cot assignment in less than 40 seconds. He moved on. Behind him came the school board vice chair with a lanyard and a rolling suitcase, then the off-duty deputy in station fleece who had already passed through once to ask about charging stations and now returned with his sister and her son. Then a woman Mike knew only as a regular from the gas mart who smoked behind pump 3 at midnight, now holding a cat carrier and apologizing for the noise. Each one had a category that fit. Each one crossed the tape arrow and disappeared into the cot rows. He looked back toward the janitor's alcove. The mother was still there in torn strap motel slippers, one hand at her son's shoulder, one near the girl's knee. No wristbands, no cot number, no assigned lane to enter. By the time intake called for the next name, 63 adults had moved through Line B since dawn, without stopping at that alcove for more than a glance. Then 64, then 65, a pastor from Linden Avenue, a school board vice chair, one off-duty deputy, two insurance adjusters with branded windbreakers and clipboards sealed in gallon bags, the motel owner with keys on a red float ring and rainwater on his cuffs, a neighbor from County Road 8. Mike had seen 3 winters in a row at the feed store, always first to talk about standards, now stepping around a 7-year-old to keep his jeans clean from mop bucket overflow. Every single one of them kept to their own urgency. No one was monstrous. That was the worst part. They were tired, soaked, scared for their own people, and still the result was the same as if cruelty had been planned. A family small enough to miss got treated like a pile of belongings waiting for sorting. Carla came up beside him again, empty cup tray tucked under one arm now. Her eyes went to the intake board, then to the alcove. Family section still full, she said. They're opening overflow in the fellowship hall, but intake is splitting by age to make room. Mike kept his voice low. Who made that call? County rep upstairs, then church admin signed off. Temporary only on paper. She gave a tired half shake of her head. Paper words. You know how that goes. At the table, a volunteer with a red pen read from a laminated guideline, while another wrote names on adhesive bands. If male minor is over 6 and family cots are at capacity, reassigned to supervised boys' row until reunification review. She spoke like she was reading weather alerts. Neutral, practiced, clean. The sentence carried down the corridor and lodged where the alcove could hear it. The mother flinched once, not visibly to anyone who did not watch for it. Mike watched for it. Her fingers closed around the towel with biscuit wrapped inside, then eased, then closed again. The boy lifted his face and looked toward the intake voice, then at his sister, uncertain which direction was safe. The girl did not move at all. She listened with the stillness of someone who had learned that adults made life-changing decisions, while children pretended not to hear. By 7:12, the leak above the bulletin board had widened, and drops were falling faster, pinging the rim of the mop bucket in a thin metallic rhythm that cut between every conversation. Mike crossed back to the alcove and crouched again, one knee to concrete, his right side angled toward the hall so he could keep the intake table in view without turning his head. The mother looked at him with the same guarded calculation as before, but now there was a raw edge under it, the look of someone who had reached the end of private strategies and found no room left. We can do a temporary split, she said before he asked anything. That's what she just said. Temporary. The word broke at the end, just enough to hear. Mike did not correct her. He did not tell her temporary could stretch. He had worn too many uniforms and sat through too many hearings not to know what temporary became once a form existed. Instead, he shifted his gaze to the girl because children spoke truer when adults stopped filling the air with reassurance. She watched his hands again first, then his face. Her hair was still streaked with fine plastered dust near the part, and someone, maybe her mother, maybe herself, had smoothed one side behind her ear at some point in the night with careful fingers despite everything else. She held Biscuit against her chest with both arms now, motel towel damp and wrinkled around the rabbit-stitched belly. Her brother leaned against her shoulder, eyes half-lidded, but alert to changes in tone. Intake called another name. A cartwheel squealed at the corridor turn. Somewhere upstairs a door slammed and shook chalk dust from a ledge. The room kept moving around them. Moments earlier the girl had leaned close and asked in a whisper that cut straight through the corridor noise not to let them separate her family. He had answered just as directly, telling her they would stay together and that he was making a call. The words were still fresh in the alcove. Not comfort exactly, but a line they could hold. The mother closed her eyes for one breath. Not relief exactly. More like bracing for disappointment she could not afford, and accepting the risk anyway. "Who are you calling?" she asked. "People who can stand where they're told and keep standing," he replied. Carla stepped into the alcove mouth, then, as if she had been waiting without hovering. She looked at Mike, then at the mother. "I can keep them off reassignment for a few minutes," she said. "No promises past that unless something changes." "Something's changing," Mike said. He stood, joints clicking, and moved back into the corridor traffic without touching anyone, threading past wet coats and donation boxes and a volunteer trying to tape extension cords above the floor line. The flip phone came out of his vest pocket already open, hinge loose enough to wobble, screen webbed at one corner from an old drop in a gravel lot outside Chillicothe 2 summers earlier. He climbed 3 steps to the side exit by the kitchen, pushed through a metal door that stuck at the sill, and stepped under the narrow awning where rain came in at an angle. An engine smell sat heavy over the lot. Outside, the riders were where he had left them. Helmets off now, faces lined and watchful, hands moving supplies from saddlebag to folding table in quiet chains. Deputy Harlan stood near the curb with his radio, no longer blocking doors, just tracking movement like a man recalibrating assumptions in real time. The deacon carried 2 flats of bottled water toward the basement entrance beside a rider twice his width, and neither spoke. County utility linemen were finally unwinding cable at the annex, glancing up every few seconds toward the bike rows, as if checking whether order could hold. Mike hit speed dial 3 and waited through 1 crackle, 2, then the click that meant the road captain was on. "Fletcher," he said. "Go." Mike kept it to logistics, voice level, eyes on the basement door. "Linden Avenue Baptist, south entrance. Need child-safe perimeter at intake and cot lanes. Need dry family bay with lockable door in 30 minutes. Need 2 retired nurses forward, 1 notary if we got him, and legal observer for county disaster family unity clause. Bring ID affidavit packets. Bring batteries, kid socks, shelf-stable protein, coloring kits. No colors, no noise." A pause on the line, short and clean. Then, "Copy all. How many in your immediate?" "1 mother, 2 minors, reassignment risk active. Intake pressure high." "Understood. Hold your position. 10 minutes to movement." Mike looked across the lot, at row after row of bikes, beaded with rain, at men the county called trouble, standing in disciplined lanes around pallets of blankets and water. He lowered his voice 1 degree. "Make it look like traffic support until I signal." "Received." The call ended with a dry click. No speech about motives. No promises. Just tasking. He folded the phone shut and stood under the awning for half a beat, while cold rain mist touched the scar on his cheek and ran down his collar. Behind him, through the propped kitchen door, he could hear intake line B still reading names, still assigning people by available boxes, still inches away from doing what the storm had started. He slipped the phone back into his vest, turned toward the stairwell, and went down to the alcove without telling anyone in that hallway what was already rolling toward them. He hit the basement landing at a steady pace, 1 hand trailing the cinder block wall to keep his back loose, and the corridor sounds closed around him again. The wet slap of shoes, the papery crackle of forms, the leak tapping the mop bucket in thin, regular strikes. Intake B was still moving in hard little bursts. Stop and start, stop and start. Each pause long enough for somebody to ask a question nobody at the table had authority to answer. Mike passed the bulletin board and caught Carla's eye. She read his face, not his vest, and gave one short nod toward the alcove, as if to say she had held the line as long as she could. The mother was where he had left her, knees angled toward both children at once, motel slippers planted on damp concrete. The boy had slid lower against his sister's arm and was fighting sleep in quick blinks, startled awake each time a voice rose at intake. The girl still held Biscuit, wrapped in the motel hand towel. She saw Mike, and her shoulders came down a fraction. He crouched once more to their level and kept his voice low enough that only the three of them could hear. "They're coming," he said. The mother searched his face for the catch in that sentence, the condition hidden under it. "How long?" "Minutes." At 7:16, the first sign was not sound exactly, but pressure, a faint, low tremor that moved through the floor and up the concrete wall where Mike's shoulder rested. So slight, it could have been a truck, braking on County Road 8 if you had not spent years measuring engines by vibration. He turned his head toward the stairwell. His left ear gave him only the old high ring. His ribs gave him the rest. The second pulse came broader, layered, not one motor, but many holding staggered rhythm. Intake kept reading names for another 10 seconds before anyone else in the hallway noticed. Then the leak in the ceiling began to ripple. It was a small thing, water trembling in the edge of the cracked tile as the frequency deepened. But Carla saw it and looked toward the door. A man in line stopped mid-sentence. The volunteer with the red pen lifted her eyes from the wristband sheet and listened, chin tilted. The sound reached them as a low roll under the generator hum, then climbed in a measured wave until it sat in the sternum like a second heartbeat. Not chaotic, coordinated. Mike had heard artillery at a distance in open desert and highway thunder under overpasses, and nothing in either memory matched this exactly. This was mechanical and human together, tuned by habit. The boy in the alcove pressed his palms over his own ears. His sister covered one ear for him with her free hand without looking away from Mike. She had learned that move in a room 12 and had not put it down yet. The rumble rose another step, and now everyone in intake line B could feel it through shoe soles and cot legs and folding table braces. Upstairs, metal chair feet scraped across tile and then went still. Somebody near the stairwell whispered, "How many is that?" Nobody answered because the count arrived with sight, and sight had not reached the hallway yet. Mike stood and moved to the corridor center, where he could see both the alcove and the basement door. Carla came beside him, shoulder nearly touching his arm. "You called all of them," she said. "I called who was close." The door at the top of the stairwell opened and closed 3 times in quick sequence, each swing carrying a wet draft and a fuller blast of engine note. The deacon from Linden Avenue came down 2 steps, stopped and gripped the rail with both hands. His collar was still open. Rain had darkened his shirt at the shoulders. He looked at Mike, then at the intake table, and spoke to no one in particular. "Their line past the annex." The red pen volunteer swallowed and set her marker down flat. "County asked for traffic control, not—" Her sentence thinned out under the next wave of sound. Engines. Hundreds of engines. By 7:19, the roll had become structural, rattling taped plastic over the fellowship windows and setting the stacked hymnals near the supply closet into a soft shiver. Mike felt each pulse along old scar tissue at his jaw hinge, felt it in his damaged ear as pressure without pitch, and knew exactly what the road captain had done. Split arrival lanes, hold revs low, synchronize entry so noise carried as warning but not threat. Sound before sight, intent declared in cadence. A teenager from the overflow row came to the corridor mouth with 2 younger kids and stared up the stairwell, wide-eyed, No fear yet, just uncertainty. One deputy appeared at the landing, breath quick from climbing, and looked down to intake. "They're requesting clear lanes at south entrance," he said. "No one blocks the doors." Mike met his gaze. Deputy Harlan this time, rain dripping from his cuffs. Not the old posture now, not barrier, coordination. "Copy that," Carla answered before intake could argue. "We can clear 6 feet if we move cot 3 and 4. The deputy nodded and turned back up without another word. The first bikes came into view through the high basement window wells as dark movement and light flashes on wet chrome. Then more, then rows. Helmets beaded with rain, headlights held steady. Front wheels aligned in deliberate intervals that made the lot look gridded from above. Somebody upstairs counted out loud, voice carrying down the stairwell in clipped beats as if reading inventory. 489, 493, 498. A pause for the last turn into the lot. Then clear enough for the whole basement to hear, 500 motorcycles strong. The number landed harder than the noise. Intake stopped pretending it was unaffected. The volunteer with the wristband set them down and rubbed her forearm once, leaving a streak of blue ink. The school board vice chair stepped out of line and moved to the wall to make space. 2 insurance adjusters with branded jackets looked at each other and then at their clipboards as if seeing paper for what it was and what it was not. The off-duty deputy in station fleece put his phone away and helped drag a folding table back against the cinder block without being asked. Mike did not smile. He watched lanes. The road captain entered first through the basement door with rain still on his beard, removed his gloves, and spoke to Carla in plain logistics. "We need a 20-foot corridor from this stair to your intake desk and a 10-foot quiet lane on that side for families with minors." He pointed with an open hand, never at faces, only at floor and doorways. "Outer ring is set in the lot. Middle ring at both doors in 2-minute rotations. No one in or out without a line escort until county signs the sheet." Carla nodded once. "We can give you the corridor. Quiet lane starts at that radiator. Good?" He lifted his radio to his mouth. "South, interior live. Bring med pair and documents." No slogan. No show. 2 women came in behind him wearing cut vests over scrub tops, gray hair braided tight under rain hoods. Retired nurses, Mike guessed correctly, carrying soft trauma bags labeled with black tape. Blisters, respiratory, pediatric basics. A third rider followed with a hard case and a portable stamp kit. Notary. The legal observer arrived 30 seconds later in a yellow rain shell with a county code binder, zipped in plastic, glasses fogged from temperature change, expression set for argument built from statutes rather than volume. The wall began as tape and bodies placed with care. Mike and 3 riders moved cot 3 and 4 2 feet left, then another foot, opening a straight lane from alcove to intake that did not force the mother and kids through the main crush. 2 more riders set folding screens on loan from the triage corner, creating visual cover without closing exits. At the stairwell, the middle ring formed in pairs, shoulder-width apart, leaving exactly enough room for 1 stretcher or 1 stroller to pass without turning sideways. Outside, the engine note dropped in sequence as outer ring bikes shut down by row, reducing noise while maintaining presence. Inside, boots stayed planted. At 7:24, intake attempted to resume reassignment calls, but the legal observer stepped to the table and opened the code binder to a tab already marked in red. Her voice was clear, not loud. "County Disaster Family Unity Clause applies once minors are declared displaced by weather event and custodial parent is present. Reassignment by sex or age cannot override immediate family integrity unless there is documented safety risk. Do you have documented safety risk?" The red pen volunteer looked to church admin. Church admin looked to county rep at the stairwell. County rep looked at the clause and then at the lane full of witnesses, uniforms and leather and soaked civilians alike, all waiting for an answer that could survive daylight. He cleared his throat. No document risk. Then keep them together, the legal observer said, and placed a blank affidavit packet on the table with the notary's stamp beside it. Mike felt the tightness at the back of his neck ease by 1 degree. He crossed to the alcove and held out his hand, palm up, not touching. "We've got your lane." The mother looked past him and finally saw it. Riders at measured intervals, not crowding, not staring, simply occupying the gaps where process failed. Carla at the lane entrance with a wristband roll and an intake sheet, rewritten for 1 unit of 3, 2 nurse volunteers kneeling at another cot, taping a child's blistered heel with the same steady hands they used on anyone. The mother rose slowly, legs stiff, son against her hip, daughter still gripping biscuit. She did not thank him. She did not need to. She stepped into the cleared corridor and kept both children within reach. As they moved, the wall moved with them in practiced increments. Pair at the stairwell held position. Pair at intake shifted half-step to widen the turn. Mike took the outside edge nearest the crowd, giving the family the cinder block side where no one could brush past. The boy watched his boots. The girl watched his hand. At the table, Carla wrapped 3 wristbands, one after another, reading each name back for confirmation so the record could not be bent later. "Family unit confirmed," she said. The notary stamped the affidavit. The sound was small and final. By 7:31, the lane was operating as if it had always existed. Families with minors were routed through the quiet side, intake questions shortened to essentials. Separation language struck through on the laminated sheet with a black marker so thick it bled to the back. Outside, outer ring riders stood by bikes in rain-dark leather, rotating by watch every 12 minutes. Engines off now, presence intact. Inside, nobody had to raise their voice to be heard. Mike stayed at the edge of the corridor, back against cinder block, eyes on the moving line. The girl passed him once more on the way to assigned cots, biscuit under her chin, and reached out with 2 fingers to catch the seam of his vest for half a second as if checking that he was real and still there. Then she let go and kept walking between her mother and brother, all 3 inside 1 lane, unbroken. Unbroken, but still shaking from the inside, the family reached cot row F where the quiet lane ended, and the temporary screens gave way to open space, and Mike stayed a half-step back while Carla checked the number tags twice, tore 3 fresh labels from a strip, and pressed them to the cot rails as if the act of naming a place could make it hold. The mother sat first, then immediately stood again because sitting looked too much like letting down guard, and she tucked the motel hand towel tighter around Biscuit, even though the rabbit no longer needed drying. The boy swayed where he stood until one of the retired nurses crouched and asked permission with her eyes before touching him, then peeled off his soaked socks and replaced them with a pair from a clear bin marked Kids 6 to 8 in black marker. He watched her hands and did not pull away. At 7:44, with the rain easing to a softer hiss against the basement window wells, the notary set his hard case on a card table beside intake and began processing emergency affidavits in a line that now moved with purpose instead of panic, 1 family at a time, each form stamped and logged with a carbon copy clipped to a yellow legal pad. The cracked flip phone call had become paperwork, and paperwork had become shelter space that no one could revoke with a shrug. Deputy Harlan stood at the end of the table and read each completed sheet before initialing the county witness box, jaw tight, radio quiet. When he reached the mother's page, he looked up once at Mike, then back down, and signed without comment. He had started the morning guarding a door from the riders. Now he guarded the record for them. The deacon came through the lane carrying a stack of folded blankets against his chest, collar still open, rainwater dried to salt at his cuffs, and paused at row F as if unsure whether he was permitted to intrude. The mother glanced at him, then at the blankets. He set them down at the foot of the cot and said, "These are clean," in a voice that sounded smaller than before. She nodded once. He did not offer a prayer and did not ask for one. He moved on to the next row, where he began handing blankets to riders and families alike without checking patches first. Near the stairwell, the school board vice chair took a call from district enrollment, then crossed to Carla's table with a binder tucked under her arm and asked for names of school-age children, missing records, speaking quickly now, practical now, as if she were trying to make up distance in public. She never explained the look she had given Mike in the lot. She simply sat down with a legal pad and started a list. Grade, last school, emergency contact, replacement backpack needed. 2 insurance adjusters who had kept their clipboards dry all morning turned those clipboards sideways and used them as writing boards for FEMA intake numbers and pharmacy replacement slips. They never said what they had thought when the engines first arrived. Their silence turned useful. By 8:26, the church clock still showed 4:13, fixed forever between marks, but every working phone in the basement agreed on the hour, and the rhythm of the place had changed from surge to sequence. The leak above the bulletin board still pinged into the mop bucket, a thin metallic count that would have driven most people to distraction. Yet now it sounded almost like confirmation that the building still stood. The blue tape arrows on the floor had curled at the edges in the humidity and were replaced with wider lanes of duct tape, laid down by 2 riders and 1 utility lineman who measured the turns with a tape reel from his truck. The ice machine at the motel 2 miles south still buzzed on weak power. Someone reported at intake, and the motel owner, keys on the red float ring, signed a statement confirming room 12 had been rendered unsafe and all occupants displaced by storm impact. That paper went in the mother's file, then in a waterproof envelope, then in Carla's lockbox. Mike stayed where movement crossed, taking direction from the road captain when needed, and no direction when none was needed, his left ear ringing hard whenever a siren sounded, in the distance for some other street, some other house, some other family he could not reach this morning. He took off his gloves, rubbed a thumb across the old scar at his jaw hinge once, and helped the notary sort completed packets into 3 piles: county, shelter, family copy. The family copy for row F included the affidavit, the disaster unity clause printout with red tab, 2 replacement ID request forms, and a handwritten note from the school board office promising provisional enrollment on Monday with no delay for lost records. He slid the packet into a gallon bag and carried it to the mother himself. "These stay with you," he said. She took the bag with both hands. "I don't have a purse anymore." Carla answered from beside her before Mike could. "Then we make one." She handed over a drawstring backpack from the donation table, navy blue with a faded cereal logo, and watched while the mother placed the forms inside as carefully as if they were glass. Then she put Biscuit in on top, changed her mind, and took Biscuit back out to her daughter's arms. At 9:03, a county van from St. Bridget Transitional Housing pulled into the lot with 2 caseworkers and a ring binder of available units, 30-day emergency placements only, keyed locks, curfew waived for storm displacement. They set up at the far end of intake, and the legal observer walked the mother's packet straight over, clause highlighted, signatures complete. The caseworker, a woman named Teresa Moulton with reading glasses hooked to her collar, reviewed each page, checked 3 boxes, and said, Unit C-14 can take all three. Effective today, transport now if you're ready. The mother sat down so suddenly, the cot frame squeaked. She nodded once hard, then pressed her fist to her mouth and held it there until she could breathe evenly again. The gas-mart clerk from Exit 44 appeared at 9:17 with 2 cardboard trays of coffee and a crate of phone chargers still in retail packaging. Damp hair plastered flat from the walk across the road. He avoided Mike's eyes at first, then set the crate on the supply table and said to no one in particular, "People keep asking to call family." He never repeated what he had predicted under the canopy at dawn. He plugged in a power strip and spent the next hour untangling cords for strangers. The final transport paperwork took longer than it should have because the county printer jammed on page 3, and one rider with grease under his nails opened the panel, cleared the torn sheet, and got it running again while the deputy held a flashlight over the rollers. At 10:11 on a gray Thursday in late April, Teresa from St. Bridget printed the placement letter and handed it over with 2 keys on a plastic tag labeled C-14. The mother stared at the keys as if they might vanish if she blinked. The boy leaned against her side, asleep on his feet now. The girl stood between Mike and Carla, biscuit under her chin, watching the keys and then watching Mike's hands. When the van was loaded, riders formed one final corridor from basement door to parking lot. Rain light now, wind carrying bleach and wet pine and diesel in equal parts. No engines started, helmets stayed at their sides. The outer ring opened exactly wide enough for the van to pull through without backing, and Deputy Harlan walked alongside the driver's door until they reached County Road 8, then tapped the hood twice and stepped away. The deacon stood at the curb with both hands clasped in front of him, head bare in drizzle, and watched the van turn north toward St. Bridget. Inside the van, just before the door closed, the girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and held up the red pine keycard she had kept in her pocket all morning, the maroon logo scratched, magnetic strip cut by one deep line from gravel. Her mother looked at it, then at Mike, then at the card again. She hesitated, and Mike held out his palm without speaking. The girl placed the useless key card in his hand, then curled her other hand around his rough index finger, small grip, steady pressure, no tremor now. She held on until the caseworker said they had to roll. Then she let go, sat down beside her brother, and tucked Biscuit between them before sleep took her in the first 2 miles. By 11:57, the basement had thinned to half its earlier crowd, forms boxed, cots renumbered, leak bucket emptied and reset, legal copies sealed in labeled envelopes. The pink sandal found in floodwater was logged in, lost and found with 3 other single shoes, and 1 inhaler case. The motel owner retrieved his red ring keys and signed the abandonment note for rooms 8 through 14. The school board vice chair taped a new sheet above intake listing Monday bus pickup points for displaced students, and this time she pressed every corner flat until it held. The church clock still read 4:13. Nobody fixed it that day. Mike stood under it a moment, keycard in his vest pocket beside the old school photo, and listened to the building breathe through generators and tired voices and one distant roll of thunder moving east. He had spent years being recognized by the wrong evidence. That morning, the county entered a different record. Sometimes the line between menace and mercy is only who gets believed when they say, "Stay together." Sometimes the people a town learns to fear are the ones who show up early enough to keep a family from being erased by procedure.